Hey, Kadie, where do you put a dead potato?
I will have none of that. Make yourself useful. Go fetch some water. Please.
What?
Go fetch some water.
There's a hole in the bucket, dear Kadie, dear Kadie. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Kadie, a hole.
Well, fix it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Well, fix it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Fix it.
With what shall I fix it, dear Kadie, dear Kadie? With what shall I fix it, dear Kadie? With what?
With straw, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. With straw, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Use straw.
But the straw is too long, dear Kadie, dear Kadie. The straw is too long, dear Kadie, too long.
Then cut it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Then cut it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Cut it.
With what shall I cut it, dear Kadie, dear Kadie? With what shall I cut it, dear Kadie? With what?
With an axe, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. With an axe, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Use an axe.
But the axe is too dull, dear Kadie, dear Kadie. The axe is too dull, dear Kadie, too dull.
Then sharpen it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Then sharpen it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Sharpen it.
On what shall I sharpen it, dear Kadie, dear Kadie? On what shall I sharpen it, dear Kadie? On what?
On a stone, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. On a stone, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. On a stone.
But the stone is too dry, dear Kadie, dear Kadie. The stone is too dry, dear Kadie, too dry.
Then wet it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Then wet it, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Wet it.
With what shall I wet it, dear Kadie, dear Kadie? With what shall I wet it, dear Kadie? With what?
Try water, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Try water, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Try water.
In what shall I fetch it, dear Kadie, dear Kadie? In what shall I fetch it, dear Kadie? In what?
Use a bucket, dear Hudson, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Use a bucket, dear Hudson, dear Hudson. Use a bucket.
There's a hole in the bucket, dear Kadie, dear Kadie. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Kadie, a hole.